minutes for January. Please let Donovan or myself know so we can make those changes. Otherwise, the assumption is that they are final and will be correct. So with that, I guess, Allison, if you could record, and Suad, if you can introduce your colleague, Margaret, that would be greatly appreciated.
Well, definitely, it's my pleasure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Suad bin Ramadan, and maybe a few of you have already known me before presenting about the VOC definition. And today I really have the pleasure to introduce Margaret Shepard. I came to know her a few years ago when I started working on the revision of the regulatory definition of VOC. And since then, honestly, she became instrumental to my work in coordinating between both of our programs. She's currently in the same Office of Air Radiation. However, we are in different offices or sub-offices, I would say. She's in the Atmospheric Program Office, and I am in the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. She perhaps can go a little further down talking about her branch and what they do specifically in her branch. Since 2000, she has been the lead for the USEPA Significant New Alternatives Policy Program, known as SNAP program, and has been doing review of health and environmental impacts related to ozone depleting substances. The SNAP ruling generally covers more than really depleting issues. It covers other aspects like toxicity and global warming potential, as she will be explaining in her presentation. And I think it's a good place for people like me looking for data on many of the EPA's work and finding in comparable programs. She has been working with EPA for more than 30 years. Congratulations. Since 1990, she touched base with many aspects like protecting the ozone layer, reducing acid rain, and improving air quality. As much as she worked on risk assessment from radioactive waste from chemicals in drinking water. Margaret comes to EPA with a BA in physics from, I hope I'm saying the right name, Wesleyan University.
Wesleyan.
Is that correct? Wesleyan?
Wesleyan University, yes.
Wesleyan University, and a master's degree in environmental planning and management from the Johns Hopkins University. So I really personally look forward to her presentation. So the floor is yours, Margaret, and welcome to this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Suad. And well, I hope that the rest of you found it easier to get on than I did. It's just one of those days where, it's just the way life is in a pandemic. You're fortunate, you actually can get to work on your laptop, maybe not, but hopefully today is a good day. And hopefully we'll all learn a little something today. So I'll talk a little bit first about the environmental problem that SNAP helps to deal with, tell you a little bit about the program and how it works, its guiding principles, how we do under the SNAP program, and to show you some of the resources we have on our SNAP website. And I'll talk about some rules that might be of interest in particular to some of the state environmental agencies. And I'll mention also about some recent legislation that was passed that has an impact related to hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs. And then I'll also give you a link to some additional resources. So the ozone layer, it was first noticed back in the 1980s that there was a hole that was developing in the springtime in the Antarctic, and then it was discovered that the theory that had been developed back in the 1970s that chlorofluorocarbons might be harming the ozone layer, it was in fact measured in the environment. And the ozone layer is Earth's sunscreen. It protects all of us from ultraviolet radiation coming from outside the Earth. And that natural sunscreen is regenerated, but right now it's being depleted faster by ozone depleting substances that we have created. And so if you compare 2020 to 1987, that ozone hole is deeper, but the good news is it's considerably better than its low point back around 2010. So we've been seeing improvement, and in fact, scientists are estimating that by the middle of this century, the ozone layer should have pretty well recovered, or at least be back to the levels that it was back in the 1980s. So that's good news. So there's an international agreement called the Montreal Protocol on Substances that Deplete the Ozone Layer. And here in the United States, we have supplemented that with Title VI to the Clean Air Act. And you don't have to have all of this memorized, but there are different provisions that give different kinds of authority. Some of it deals with getting rid of, reducing production and prohibiting import of ozone depleting substances. There are prohibitions related to using ozone depleting substances in certain kinds of products. There's a program for reducing emissions, particularly from refrigerants, and a prohibition against venting refrigerant into the environment. And then I'll talk particularly today about the Significant New Alternatives Policy Program. And if you think of how the US government is working together with industry and with other governments to try and protect the ozone layer, we're looking at different levels: turning off the tap, controlling use and emissions, and SNAP is part of that. And then also trying to get at reducing health effects. So the SNAP program is authorized under the Clean Air Act. We go through, we look at information on substitutes to ozone depleting substances, and then we decide, is this safe enough to use? Or if we use it in a certain way, will it be safe enough to use? We call that acceptable subject to use conditions. Or is it something that we think that the way a particular substance would be used in a typical use is just not going to be used safely? Then we list it as unacceptable. And that means it's actually prohibited for particular use, prohibited to be used as a substitute for ozone depleting substances. So we have a number of environmental and health criteria that we look at, and that's going to be on our next page. And usually we get information on substitutes by producers of chemicals who come into us, or maybe it's a blend of chemicals. And it's the first time that it's going to hit the market. They need to come into SNAP first. And it's been very effective, I think, at getting alternatives out there listed so that industry can see, here are some options that EPA has looked at, and we can feel at least somewhat more comfortable with this thing that's new. And at this point, actually, we're getting close to 500 new substitutes by now. So I mentioned about our different kinds of listings. Some of the areas where the SNAP program operates, it's 8 different industrial sectors where ozone depleting substances traditionally have been used. So the biggest one being refrigeration and air conditioning, but also things like foam blowing agents, aerosols, cleaning solvents, fire suppressants, and then also solvents used in adhesives, coatings, and inks. Those are some of our bigger industrial sectors. And so if a chemical producer has a new chemical that they want to introduce into one of those sectors, they send in a submission to the SNAP program. And we take a look at that information that they give us. And we look at things like ozone depletion potential, global warming potential, local air quality, which is where I have a lot of interaction with Suad. We take a look at, might there be impacts that might cause problems for meeting ground level ozone standards. We also take a look at flammability risks, particularly right now we're looking at a lot of flammable refrigerants. And then we also take a look at toxicity and impacts on human health. And we look both at workers and also at consumers and the general public. So as far as guiding principles of the SNAP program, some of these might surprise you. For instance, restrict only those substitutes that are significantly worse. And part of that was, in the 1990s, we were trying to get this program off the ground, and we really wanted to have options out there. And we realized that it's really hard to find something that's perfect. And so we don't require that substitutes be absolutely risk-free, but we do expect that there can be mitigating factors in some cases. For instance, there might be other environmental regulations that are in place already. So we're only going to restrict something if we think that it's significantly worse than other options that are available, not just worse than the old ozone depleting substances, but worse than the other options that are available for the same use. So like we'll compare, the refrigerant for a car compared to a refrigerant for a car air conditioning system. So, and by the same token, because we're looking at particular uses, we can actually reach different listings for different uses. So for instance, we might say a particular chemical is okay if you use it in a vapor degreaser for cleaning solvents, but maybe it's not okay if you're spraying it with an aerosol can. And maybe it's not okay if you're using it as a carrier solvent in an adhesive or a coating. So our review process starts with, we get information. Typically, it's from an outside submitter. Occasionally, we'll look at a chemical ourselves, or sometimes we'll have another environmental or another federal agency come into us and say, hey, EPA, have you looked at this? We go through, we look at the information. Usually we need additional information for our review. So we'll go back, share letters with the submitter, and then we reach a decision. So about 20% of our decisions have gone through a notice and comment rulemaking process. And we do that in those cases where we think there might need to be some sort of restriction. And so we take, we offer for notice and comment. And then eventually we publish whatever restrictions there might be in the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, a good 80% of the time, we look at something and we say, oh, this looks like it's going to be used safely, and it's not that different from everything that's already being used for particular use. In that case, we say that's acceptable. We publish it in a notice in the Federal Register, and then we put it on a list on our website. And there's our website. And this will be in the presentation and later on at the end. And I will draw your attention first here on the right side. We have by industrial sector, a link to where you can find more listings. In addition, we also, the same information you can reach through this link for acceptable and unacceptable substitutes. And then we also have a link so that you can find where we actually publish things in the Federal Register, both our rules and our notices of acceptability. So this is if you drill down a page further, if you go through that link on the previous page, actually, let me do that. If you go to this link for acceptable and unacceptable substitutes, then you end up on this page. And then you can go through further to one of those particular sectors. Let's say you are interested in looking at carrier solvents for adhesives, coatings, and inks. Okay, so then you go to the link for adhesives, coatings, and inks, and then you see for each one of those, what we call end uses, each has its own individual set of lists. So then you can, again, push on the link, and there you are. And so there is a table here, and you can actually type stuff here in this search box so that you can try and find something, or you can scroll down. We also have information on the ozone depletion potential, the global warming potential. In many cases, if it's flammable, you also can find a link to the original listing that we had in the Federal Register. And then usually we'll have a little bit of summary information here about the listing status, maybe some additional information that we thought was particularly pertinent for a substitute. And in fact, these little arrows here, you can actually press on them, and then it will change the order from being alphabetical based on the substitute name to being in order of ozone depletion potential or global warming potential. So kind of handy. And then the other part that I pointed to, where you can look for our rules and notices, you'll go here, and then you can do a link. You can go down further to one of our 22 complete, or we're actually on our 23rd rule now. And we have 36 completed notices of acceptability as well. So you can get down to those quicker by going to SNAP notices. Two rules that might be of particular interest. We issued back in 2015 and then again in 2016 rules that changed some of our previous listings from the very beginning of the SNAP program, where we had listed a number of blends and also individual chemicals that were hydrofluorocarbons. We changed the listing from being acceptable to unacceptable, or in some cases, acceptable with restrictions. And that was for certain refrigeration, aerosol, and foam blowing uses. In particular, motor vehicle air conditioning and a lot of different kinds of commercial refrigeration uses. And then later on, in the 2016 rule, also some commercial air conditioning uses. And I mention this in particular just because we know that at this point, there are eight states that are members of the US Climate Alliance that have adopted part or all of these rules. And so as a way of dealing with climate change and trying to address some super greenhouse gases, they've adopted those rules. So now at the federal level, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals partially vacated first the 2015 rule. They said that to the extent that the rule requires manufacturers to replace the HFCs they're already using and switch to another substance, that EPA had gone beyond what the Clean Air Act said. However, for those for users who are still using ozone depleting substances, if they were replacing, then SNAP would still apply. And then in 2019, the DC Circuit Court came back and had a similar ruling affecting that 2016 rule. And then other excitement with hydrofluorocarbons. Back in December, Congress passed, along with all of the COVID relief package and the federal budget, there was also the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act. And it has a number of provisions. Probably the three biggest things that we see there. There's a program for phasing down production of HFCs, as well as what consumption is a term of art. It means both production and import. So adding to the supply within the country. And then there also are provisions for managing emissions. And then in addition, there is a provision for facilitating transition to next generation technologies where someone can come in and petition EPA and say, hey, for this particular use, can you say that this particular substance that is regulated under the AIM Act, can you do something? Can you, restrict use of it? So those are three powerful authorities that EPA will now have. In addition, a provision that might be particularly interesting for this group is that there are small business technology grants under the AIM Act. And just so you know, it's been less than 2 months since this law was passed. We're still trying to figure out, and in fact, it might be good perhaps for a future presentation for someone from our group to talk in greater detail about the AIM Act. So perhaps at that point, someone can tell you more about what we're thinking and where things are moving with those small business technology grants. And then we have some things that are already going on. Our very first action under the AIM Act was last week. We published a notice of data availability, and that's basically background information related to production and consumption of HFCs that might eventually allow us to establish allowances that would, again, lead to reduced production of HFCs. In addition, next week, we're going to have a stakeholder meeting, and from our website, both from the ozone depletion website and the SNAP website at EPA, you can find links to both of those. And so there again is the SNAP website. If you are interested in seeing either our rules or just the lists of acceptable substitutes, you can reach both of those from the SNAP website. I also have my email address and my telephone number there. And then also, if you're interested in where the heck is this in the Code of Federal Regulations, if you are, an attorney who has to find those things, it's in subpart G to 40 CFR Part 82. So that's my quick run through SNAP, and I'm wondering if people have questions.
So, Mr. Sheppard, thank you for that. And yes, we did get a question come through. It was in relation to those 8 states that adopted the rules. Which particular rules were those, and how do they relate?
Right. So the particular rules, we had a rule that we issued in July of 2015. And so that rule dealt in particular with commercial refrigeration equipment, like what you'd see in a supermarket or a convenience store or a reach-in cooler that you might see, or vending machines. Those were all controlled. Motor vehicle air conditioning systems for passenger vehicles, most kinds of foam blowing agents, and then also aerosol propellants. Those were all controlled under 2015 rule. 2016 rule, we had additional end uses that were controlled. So that included things like commercial air conditioning systems using chillers that chill water instead of chilling air, cold storage warehouses, household refrigerators and freezers. We also included at that point polyurethane spray foam, and then we also had some other provisions where we actually had some new listings, and then the different states have taken different provisions of some of those rules. So, for instance, I think California is by far the farthest along, and they have gone on ahead and done additional work. But for instance, I know that they took the provisions that relate to foam blowing agents and to commercial refrigeration and air conditioning and implemented those. And I think it's only recently that they have been, I'm trying to remember if they've started recently looking also at motor vehicle air conditioning. They had, yeah, and different states are kind of at different places, but I think a lot of them have been starting with those provisions that restrict, and for each one of those uses, each one has its own deadline for when the users are supposed to, for new use. Yeah, if you have had existing equipment that was built before the deadline, yeah, you can still keep on using it. Yeah, and you can keep on servicing the equipment that's already out there. But for new use after that point, you're no longer supposed to use the specific HFCs that were listed as unacceptable. So that's kind of how that works. Has that sufficiently responded to the question?
I think so.
Okay.
I'll see if there's a further clarification on that one.
Okay.
So a question that I occasionally get asked is if all these HFCs are being produced, but mostly in the developed countries, why is the hole forming in the South? Now, from my understanding, it is a matter of the reaction that causes ozone depletion is driven by both cold and UV or some photochemical reactions. So you'd have both more on the Antarctic side, correct?
Right. So as far as the cold, just what happens there is that think about what happens in wintertime when you're in the Antarctic. It would be completely dark. And then when springtime comes, finally light returns. And if it's been cold enough, there are going to be polar stratospheric clouds, and those tend to, the chlorine from the chlorofluorocarbons and bromine from halons tend to collect there in the clouds, and they catalyze the ozone depletion reaction. And so that's why we see a hole, and why it's particularly large in the springtime. And actually, I think recently, in the past few years, for the first time, we actually saw a somewhat smaller ozone hole in the Arctic for similar reasons when it got really, really cold. And why now? Actually, there's been an ozone hole all along, but it was getting worse, partly because there was this huge stockpile in the atmosphere. And so it's been slowly been drawn down. And that's because there's been less going in, thanks to all of the hard work that industry has been doing, moving away from the ozone depleting chemicals. And so, so now it's really more of a matter of the ozone layer recovering, because it takes about a good 50 years for the ozone layer to regenerate. It does, but it's slow. So if you think, well, we really started to phase out those chemicals in the 1990s, well then, okay, we've been about 30 years in to reducing those, but we've also got a few decades more before we really get most of that washed out of the atmosphere, if you will.
Okay,
Make
thank
sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds about like what I thought. The addition of it in the polar clouds certainly added to that. Saud has a couple of questions.
Hi, yeah, I actually thank you, Margaret. That was really a great presentation that summed up, what I tried, I think, to stress out in the beginning, how important for different programs at EPA to coordinate. And then now probably my questions are going to maybe help some people who are interested in knowing about the process. And so I'm going to have different folds to my question. The first one is who does initiate a SNAP review? Is it generally coming from the industry, or EPA requires that when a new chemical is coming out?
Right. I'd say a good 90 to 95% of the time, it is someone from industry coming in. And most often it is a chemical producer, like say a Chemours or a Honeywell, or back in the day, DuPont. Less often, it's also someone who produces a product that uses a substitute. So for instance, at one point, we actually had Coca-Cola come into us with a submission saying, hey, we would like to use carbon dioxide instead of HFCs as a refrigerant in vending machines, because we want to go green. We want to move away from HFCs. Or for that matter, we also had some manufacturers of different kinds of foam who came into us because they said, we want to provide this information to you, as I'm not sure why they chose to do it rather than having their blowing agent supplier do it, but maybe they knew more of the technical details, so they sent the information into us.
Okay,
and we do have the authority as the agency to do our own reviews, but honestly, we have a pretty full inbox with the information that we're already getting from industry. So that is definitely our bread and butter. Next question.
My next question is, I know by looking at some of the rulemaking for the SNAP program, there's a wealth of information. And I was wondering who is responsible for, providing the data that is used in the assessment. Is it the industry coming with it, or EPA has the responsibility to go and look for information to make the assessment?
The responsibility is on the shoulders of the submitter to get us the information that we need for our review. In some cases, we might have to do some additional analysis on our own, but usually that might be more often, say, if we're doing a rulemaking and say we want to learn about industry standards that are out there. So we might get the basic information from the submitter, and they'll say, we would like to use this flammable refrigerant in this kind of equipment. And by the way, there is this particular industry standard that applies. So then we might work with the standard setting body and learn more about their process and about the standard, and then decide, do we think that addresses the risks? So so that gives you both an example of the information that we get provided, and by and large, all of that health information, all the toxicity studies, the information on the global warming potential, the ozone depletion potential, that will come to us from the submitters. But we do, in addition, sometimes need to look for some information on our own.
Okay, thank you. Now, a little bit maybe about the process. And I know that generally rulemaking will require like a group of people with a diverse, background and expertise. Can you please give a, quick idea who are really involved in your work group making? Are they all from EPA only? Do you get some experts from outside of EPA?
Right. We have primarily EPA staff. We also have some consultants under contract to us, in particular, like say we have some deep questions about the toxicology. Then we will both consult inside EPA with other folks at EPA who are toxicologists, and we'll also work with these folks who are under contract to us. And in some cases, we might end up consulting with other federal agencies as well.
Thank you. I think I saw some other questions, so I'm going to stop. Maybe if we have more time, I will come with other questions to you. Thank you, Margaret.
Okay.
All right. Okay, thank you for that. So Jeremy had the question, does the SNAP evaluation process take small business considerations into effect when looking at acceptable and unacceptable substitutes for industrial use?
Well, that's an interesting question. If we get to the point where we would restrict use, then we definitely consider what might be potential impacts on small businesses. If it's something that we're just listing as acceptable, we would only consider it to the extent that as we are going through our evaluation, we might try and make sure that some of the scenarios that we're looking at consider situations that represent kind of a range of use. So we might think about, what if we've got, this equipment that's being used by, say, the 7-Eleven at the corner, or what if you've got a small business that is using their vapor degreaser, what would be the situation for them? What kind of exposure might they experience, so that, we don't assume that everyone is, kind of at the state of the art, if you will. We do try and look at these things a little conservatively, so that hopefully, at least almost everyone who's out there using it will have a chance to use it safely.
Okay. So in general, for the different, especially when you're looking at the AIM Act, did it have essentially a greenhouse gas equivalent rating that it assigned to different refrigerants, and does it have an upper threshold?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is this in terms of those two rules that I mentioned?
Yes. So a little bit further on that is, I was asked once by a car manufacturer that was looking at substituting the refrigerant in their vehicle refrigerants, and they were looking at selling overseas. And at that time, the European Union required that all refrigerants have a greenhouse gas equivalent of 250 or less. The one they had at that time was about a 1200, and the new one they were going to was the equivalent of 4, I think, as compared to carbon dioxide.
Right. Well, I will mention that in that 2015 rule, we did change the listing of a number of the substitutes that we had listed as acceptable in motor vehicle air conditioning, including in particular HFC 134A, which is, for decades was the standard
Mhm.
moving directly out of CFC 12. And then when we took 134A and some of those other substitutes off the list, we did leave behind some of the same ones that are allowable under the EU's regulations. So, carbon dioxide, HFO 1234YF, which has that global warming potential of 4 or less,
Mhm.
and also HFC 152A, which has a GWP depending on which scale you're using, around 124 or so.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we didn't necessarily use a cutoff, but when we did those rules, we kind of tried to see where's there kind of like if we did kind of a scale and look at how all of the global warming potentials line up, is there a pretty big gap where we can say this is clearly worse than these ones down here? So
Yeah.
there was a line drawing, but it was more sort of one of the principles that I didn't make such a big deal about before, but we are looking at comparative risk. So not so much a cutoff number as kind of a clustering of what are the things that seem to be safer versus the things that seem to be less safe.
Okay.
Margaret, I agree with you on that. I don't think there's a cutoff for the global warming potential in particular, but given that we are looking at alternatives, and this is how actually the industry tries to present them, is a comparative assessment with whatever they are going to replace. So generally, they try to show that it is a better one. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I have, do we have more questions, or I can have another slide in one more.
Oh, it's not, but yeah, the question did relate to that 1234YF, as you're mentioning. And the question was actually in relation to RECRA issues because they had seen a Ferrari study where it was potential flammable under extreme circumstances, i.e. a wreck that would break the refrigerant seal and spray the refrigerant directly onto the hot engine. So that's where that question mainly came from.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and I remember we had to look at some of those scenarios for that particular chemical, because I remember working on that one. Yeah, and I'm trying to think what else might be helpful there, but yeah, we did have use conditions, and in fact, in general, we don't allow flammable refrigerants for motor vehicle air conditioning just because there is that risk of collision. But we felt like we did get enough information both on HFC 152A and for HFO 1234YF. Yeah, they're less flammable than, say, propane. And there was quite significant engineering and risk assessment done by the audio industry, and they provided that information to us, and that gave us sufficient comfort that those substitutes would be used safely, and safe enough, similar enough to what's been used in the past, that we felt comfortable going ahead and listing those as acceptable subject to use conditions.
Okay, thank you. So do you got a question?
I think maybe I wanted just to tease a little bit Margaret about this. I know it's all over the news, and she talked about some rulemaking that were sometimes coming to, for example, a chemical was acceptable at some point, then EPA can come back and say now it's no longer acceptable. And I wanted to ask her if there's any effort lately with what we hear about the PFAS chemicals. And as I realize already in the VOC program that we have few of them that were exempted before, and they are now coming to the surface as maybe problematic chemicals. Is there any action right now to kind of either integrate some of the work that is being done on those ones and review their acceptability?
Well, right now, no. I will say though that that we do take a look, at least somewhat, at, particularly when some of the hydrofluoroolefins, the HFOs, were first being introduced. Before we ever went forward with the listing for HFO 1234YF in motor vehicle air conditioning, for example, we took a look and we did estimates to see, would we expect that would there potentially be an impact on local air quality, and would we expect that that there would be environmental breakdown products, because, well, both HFC 134A and HFO 1234YF, both the air conditioning refrigerant that has been used and the new one that is in the most recent models of cars, do break down eventually in the environment into trifluoroacetic acid. And so, yeah, they might be considered PFAS because of that. And so we did take a look at that, and we even looked at like a worst case scenario where, what if every bit of refrigerant that was used for every use changed to HFO 1234YF? And what if it became used as a blowing agent at the same time? If there was that massive an introduction, would we expect to see negative impacts? And when we did that analysis, we did not see it reaching the level where it would be, for instance, surpassing a level that would kill aquatic life. And so we felt like if we were doing that conservative a look at it, that's pretty helpful. But we do periodically get reminders, and certainly something we're keeping an eye on. And I think that there are scientists worldwide who are trying to keep an eye on what might it mean having, in particular, refrigerants that could have those impacts as they break down in the environment.
Thank you, Margaret.
Margaret, would the thing apply to hydrofluoroolefins or HCFOs as far as the potential breakdown to fluoroacetic acid in the upper atmosphere?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that. Were you asking about HCFOs and they're breaking
Correct.
down in the atmosphere?
Correct.
Okay. Well, we've taken a look at that, and for instance, we found that typically they will break down soon enough that they do not get taken up in any large amount up to the stratosphere. So even though they do have chlorine, we don't see any sort of significant impact on the ozone layer. But that is also something that we have taken a look at, yes.
And I don't know, with PFAS being popular, I don't know if many people are using perfluorocarbons for blowing agents or cleaning activities, or I'm not even certain if they're used as refrigerants. But
Right.
I guess, what is your take on PFCs?
Right. Well, we were concerned about those really at the beginning of the SNAP program because they are kind of forever chemicals, that they really last. And when we listed them basically saying, use these, but only if you've made your best effort to see if there's something else that works. And if you really can't get anything else to work, then you can use those. So we called those acceptable subject to narrowed use limits. And right now there's relatively little use. At one point they were introduced as fire suppressants, but the company that produced them quickly found another option that ended up having much shorter lifetimes. And they really were not used in a significant amount as refrigerants. There's a tiny bit of use as solvents, but again, there we listed them with the restriction that basically only use this if you first make your best effort to try and get something else to work first. And PFCs were never used as blowing agents.
I know this might be controversial, but ammonia has a 0 global warming potential.
Mhm.
However, it is very pungent, and although you do know when you have an ammonia leak right away, whereas some of the refrigerants don't seem to have a strong odor. But I don't know how many people would be switching to the use of ammonia for refrigeration systems.
Right. So it will depend, I think, on the particular situation. I know that some industrial systems use ammonia, and there is a small amount of use in like for supermarkets. I understand that there's like at least one commissary that the Department of Defense runs that is using ammonia as their refrigerant. I understand it's a very efficient, energy efficient refrigerant. But yeah, it really helps to have it in a good, well-sealed system. And then I guess the other place where I know ammonia has been used a fair amount is in ice rinks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for ice skating. Yeah, not something you think of every day as a refrigeration use, but it is.
Now, I know some of the chemicals you deal with can be used for precision cleaning.
Right.
I don't know if that there are certain allowances for that kind of application. Dealing with perhaps electronics or things of that nature.
Right, right. So we actually have 3 end uses for solvent cleaning in the SNAP program, and one is for metals cleaning. One is for electronics cleaning, so defluxing, that kind of thing, degreasing on electronic equipment, and then precision cleaning is also its own end use. And I guess I would say we might make some slightly different assumptions with precision cleaning, like you really need to get things well cleaned, and it will probably be very specific to the type of soil to be cleaned as to which cleaner will work, and very specific to your equipment. And again, we do have quite a variety of things listed there.
Well, one of the issues I think with metal cleaning and precision cleaning is the concern is, and it's maybe could be in aerospace or medical industry, FAA, FDA, where you have the potential for any residue remaining on the substrate and having, a need to not have that residue possibly for another application taking place after that.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's absolutely true for that kind of situation. Cleanliness is key. And I will say, some people might be surprised. I mentioned earlier that one of our principles basically is that things don't have to be perfectly safe. They have to be, basically, they need to be safe enough. And it was kind of controversial at the beginning of the SNAP program that one of the first places that we let people kind of their off ramp from CFCs ended up taking them through some chlorinated solvents, you know, trichloroethylene, not exactly an elixir of health, but we did recognize that it was also being regulated under things like, you know, the different standards for hazardous air pollutants, for example.
So I don't recall if you mentioned anything regarding hydrofluoroethers, but it seems like they run the gamut as far as global warming, moderately high to low. I don't know how widely they're used in industry as far as refrigeration or cleaning activities, or if they're even in vogue right now.
Right. There's a fair amount of use. Most often the HFEs, you know, if you're using something that really needs, what's the word I want? Yeah, if you can't get the HFE to work on its own, you might end up trying to boost the solvency by mixing it together with, say, trans-dichloroethylene. That is very common. You will see solvent cleaning blends, either with an HFE or an HFC and trans-dichloroethylene. And actually, I think that's one of the more interesting things with the HCFOs is that because they have the chlorine in there, they do tend to be have greater solvency and be a little better cleaning on their own. And then, at least so far, some of the HCFOs have ended up being better in terms of contributing to ground level ozone.
So I thank you very much, Margaret, for your willingness to prepare and give this presentation. I also thank Suad, hopefully I'm not mispronouncing your name, for suggesting you, Margaret. And you mentioned maybe there's the possibility of a future presentation, perhaps on the AIM rule, maybe on the small business technology grants. That would be certainly welcome. If you are willing to maybe pass on your hopefully good experience with your presentation today to any colleague you think could share their knowledge. I tell people, at least as far as I'm concerned, I tell them I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. And so I rely a lot on people like yourself to share knowledge. I have a smattering of information, but you know, sometimes a little information can be a dangerous thing.
Right. Well, since it sounds like there might be some interest, I will happily pass that along to my colleagues, and hopefully later this year we can maybe think ahead for scheduling, and hopefully they can give you an overview both of the act, what might be coming down, particularly as we start getting into developing regulations, and then what about those grants?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Certainly, is there any other questions? I think I've been hogging the line, so to speak, with you. I don't want to exclude anyone from asking questions. Anyone else? Well, I guess if not, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Mark. This is Suad again, and I really appreciate the opportunity. You know, I look forward to more presentations where I think this place has become really a nice platform as I see it. So please continue the good work. I really love the idea to invite people, and you know, just the word of mouth from one to another, bringing more information to this platform. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Margaret.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, and thank you for inviting me to speak.
It was a pleasure.
I guess I can mention that next month's presentation, assuming Jennifer Dixon may not be on the phone right now or on the line. Oh, wait, there she is.
I'm here.
As far as I know, metal finishing industry with a focus on air quality. April, if she is still able to present.
Yep,
on
I
March
think
6th.
she is. I talked to her the other day, so I'm pretty sure she's planning on it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And actually, I wouldn't have known about that had Jennifer not invited the people here to the wealth of information that their great state presented back in October, I believe. And so, yes, I'd heard that and I thought that would be great. I want other people to hear what she has to say. So yes, thank you, Jennifer. I'm looking forward to that. If there's nothing else, without further ado, I would say have a good rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you all again in next month on March 16th.
Thanks, Mark. Talk to you guys soon.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks all.